Hello, hello, and welcome to today's episode. I am excited to have Nicole Kerr with me today. Nicole is an award-winning health expert and best-selling author. She has appeared on CNN, PBS, CBS, ABC, the Food Channel, and a host of other TV and radio shows to share her unique perspective on wellness, nutrition, and spirituality. For the past 30 years, Nicole has worked in all sectors of society, including government, nonprofit, military, academia, healthcare, institutions, and hospitals, corporate settings, and private consultation, just to name a few, right? Today, she is pursuing her vocation as a spiritual wellness practitioner, eternity advocate, and public speaker. She's a 100% disabled veteran. Thank you for your service. Registered dietitian, nutritionist, neuro emotional practitioner, and her favorite credential is BTDT. Been there, done that. Well, Nicole, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. I think we might have one or two things to talk about.
I think so too. Thank you, Francine. I'm delighted to be here today and to talk to you about spiritual wellness. So, yeah, let's dive in.
Yeah. So share with the listeners, your journey, how you got to where you are, who you are, all the fun things.
Yeah, well, my journey is still ongoing, just like every single one of
Right.
yours is. So, I will tell you that when I was 19 years old, I was a cadet at our United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And back in the early 80s, women had just been admitted to the service academies. So, my second year there, I knew when I got there, I was in the wrong place, but I am a parent pleaser, a people pleaser. And back then at 19 years old, my father wanted one of his children to go and follow in his footsteps to the academy. So I signed up for that, wanted him to be proud of me like we all do with our parents. And when I got there, I knew I was like, oh my gosh, they're teaching me how to kill people. I just was like completely in the wrong space. And I couldn't quit because failure wasn't an option in our family. So what wound up happening is the universe, in all of its infinite wisdom, set up a series of events that got me out of there. And it was unfortunately a really painful way to get out of something. I wish now I could have just used my voice and say, this isn't for me. I would love to just, I'm going to quit. But I was in a car crash, and I'm going to just put the picture up here for your audience to
Oof.
see. It was a 1965 Corvette convertible. I was the passenger. I was getting a ride home with a senior. When I say home, I was getting a ride back to the Air Force Academy from a
And
required.
let me just stop. For those listening, you can't even tell what kind of car it is. I mean, it's pretty, yeah. Yeah,
Total. It is
it
totaled.
is.
And what wound up happening is we were on our way back to the academy from a function, and I was getting a ride back with this guy. And needless to say, he was drunk and swerved off the road, and I was pronounced dead at the scene.
Oh my
I
gosh.
was, some bystanders heard the crash, called 911. The first responders got there between 10 and 13 minutes later. I had a blanket over me. The bystanders couldn't get any vitals on me. And when the EMT took a look at me, he pulled back the blanket, couldn't get any vitals on me either, Francine. And the last thing he tried was something called a sternal knuckle press, which in the healthcare industry is designed to elicit pain in the body. They just go right up your sternum with your knuckles, and it hurts. So when they did that, the only sign of life they could get out of me was my right pupil dilated.
Oh, wow.
Now, have you ever heard that phrase, our eyes are the window to our souls?
Wow. Yes.
Okay, my soul had flown out when I went through the windshield of that car, and I went to the other side, and they on the other side told me I was going to come back. And when I came back the moment that he did that to me, and my soul came back in through my eye.
Oh,
And at
wow.
that moment, they were able to get my heart rate, a reading on that. They were able to get my blood pressure, which was 60 over zero, and normal is 120 over 80. So you can still see I was waffling in and out.
Right.
They had to do CPR the entire 20 minutes to the nearest community hospital. They didn't even get me into Colorado Springs to the main general hospital. And they basically just tried to stabilize me that night. I had massive injuries. I'm not going to go into all of them now, but everything from an amputated foot to a fourth-degree laceration between my anal and sphincter. I mean, I was very, very sick. Let's just put it that way. So that was the beginning of 4 months in a hospital, 7 weeks in ICU, two more near-death experiences. And actually, I
During that
actually
period, you had two more near-death experiences. Can we talk a little bit about the new near-death experiences?
sure. So do you know what an NDE is? Have you heard of that? What do you know about that? I'm going to
Well,
ask
I
you.
know, yeah, I mean, they go to the other side, but you come back so that you can actually talk about it.
Yeah. So basically, it refers to some kind of like mystical, profound experience that people had when they are very close to death or experience death. And that was my case. I actually experienced death. And the most common characteristic of near-death experiences are the white light. And that is what I remembered. That was the only thing I remembered for 19 years was going to this beautiful energy of white light, and it was so soothing, and it was like I was enveloped in a chrysalis, and there was no pain, and it wasn't like a deer in the headlight kind of light. You could
Yeah.
see through it, and it was actually love. It was God's love that I was enveloped in, but it took me a long time to actually figure that out. But that is the part that I did remember. The actual crash itself, going to the other side, didn't come back for another 19 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So during that time, I pieced together what happened with the car crash through my paramedic. He came back to the hospital to check on me and told me what happened through my doctor's reports, the medical, the district attorney reports. So I have all the evidence that documents that I was dead and that they did resuscitate me or resurrect me. You know, a lot of people are resurrected. I know in religion, the Bible talks about Jesus being, resurrected from the dead. Well, a lot of people that are clinically dead, it's some outside intervening force that
Yeah.
is not me bringing my own self back that is resurrecting me. So I think when you have one of these, I know when you have one of these experiences, Francine, you come back a different person. You
You would
are
have, I would think you would have to,
you are
right?
transformed, whether you want to believe it and you want to accept it and align in it or not. And that has been my journey for the last 41 years. For 20 years, I didn't have a memory of it. So I was searching. And then
Mm,
the next 20, I actually remembered going over to the other side. I remembered what I was told, which was to tell people not to be afraid of death. And you may think that that's a seemingly easy, simple statement to say, but I want to tell you it's not that easy. Death is a huge topic and one
sure.
that we in this country are what I call in death denial about. We just don't think it's going to happen to us when it
Right.
happens. It's just like it's down the road. I've got time, I've got all these belief systems we have in place. But I'm here to tell you that we need to start preparing for our own death. Okay. And we need to start doing that today. And death needs my mission now is to change the narrative around death from one of doom and gloom and negativity and depression to one where it's light and love and brilliance and change the worldview, the vibration, and cultural misunderstanding around death. And in order to start doing this, we have to address the difficulty in getting there, which is dealing with our fear of death.
Ooh, I love that. So, how do you actually guide people to see death in a less fearful way and more empowering and love and light?
Well, I think first of all, you have to understand that we are spiritual beings in a human body, and we
Yeah.
forget that. And I don't want anybody to misunderstand me because we have to, when someone dies, you have to deal with the human aspect and the emotions around that, which would be the suffering, the grief, um, all of these the devastation, whatever you're feeling around that. And we have to compassionately hold and heal that with people. But I want people to also realize there's a bigger cosmic context of benevolence regarding death, and to open up themselves to that so that your transition will go smoother and you can help others transition smoother. So the first lesson is we don't die. And that may be an alternative view for some people. But our soul lives on. That is what is that energy part of us, that consciousness. When I went through that windshield, I stopped midair and I looked down and I could see my body already in the ditch. And that is when the angel came and picked me up and took me to heaven, the other side. And I will tell you, when you're just in that consciousness, there's no pain, there's no suffering, there's no negativity. I mean, it's complete like bliss, and it happens in an instant. So I want to tell people, you don't feel pain. People always wonder if their loved one or someone they knew was in a tragic
Sure.
accident.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I didn't want him to suffer. I hope they didn't have pain. 99% of the time, your soul leaves your body before impact. So you're already on the other side, and
It
you do
knows what's about to happen.
that.
It's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, and you don't feel it, you know? And
Right.
for me on the other side, I didn't want to come back because I could see my mangled body in that ditch.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't want to get back in there because A, I don't know what the physical ramifications of everything is going to be. Am I going to be able to walk? Am I going to be able to go to the bathroom on my own? Because I was reduced back to infancy after the crash. I couldn't do anything on
Yeah.
my own. And even a year of recovery at home, my mother had to do everything for me. I was that powerless. And that's a hard thing to do when you're 19 or 20 years old, is to move back into the
And
house.
not realizing the bigger picture, I would imagine,
Right.
right? Because you
Right.
didn't have the memory for another 19 years.
Yeah.
So, I have a two-part question. One, how did that memory come back to you after 19 years? And two, what do you say to the people that are listening that going, that's a crock? Like none of that's real. Because I'm sure you
Yeah.
get that, right?
Yeah. So what I wanted to say, address the second part first. When people say that's a crock, I'm like, well, you're entitled to your opinion. This
Yeah.
is, that's why there's not a school of near-death experiences that you go to say, okay, this is what you're going to learn when you go to the
Right.
other side. But if you will look and read the literature on it, and the science is now starting to prove that more and more people are experiencing this, and it is a collective data set that shows there are 10 lessons, and we're almost all in agreement. We all have different experiences with an NDE, but the lessons are almost always the same. Now, I will say there are some people that have what they call distressing NDEs, where they don't experience the light and the love and all this wonderful blissfulness. But that's that's a minority of the experiences. And typically they may go into a dark place, and by the end of the NDE, they're back into the light place. So I do want to acknowledge that as
Yeah.
well. And what was the other part?
The other part, but I'm going to share a story that I met a gentleman last year that had an NDE, and he was a police officer that was shot. And he had this experience in the hospital, and his doctor thought he was crazy, right? His doctor was like, yeah, no, there was no nurse here that was this. And it ended up being his grandmother that had already passed and all this stuff. Well, the doctor then had an experience a few years down the road and then had his own. And the two of them actually, now have worked together. I think they wrote a book together or something like that. But right, like, because the doctor was
Yeah.
like, yeah, that doesn't, because the doctor's so like, no, that does not happen in the medical world, right?
And my
The other
doctor,
question was, what happened 19 years later that
oh,
actually,
for me to remember.
yeah,
Yeah.
for you to remember?
See there, I didn't remember what you just said. So here's the deal with memory. Memory really is just a story that we are telling. And to remember that, our body represses memories. When we go through a traumatic event, many, many times your body will just black it out. So I did not remember anything right before the crash, and just waking up in the ICU. And the first thing I said was, don't tell my dad, he'll kill me, because he's going to understand that alcohol was involved. And that was one of his big rules: do not drink. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm going to college. And he's like, don't drink and don't smoke and don't date anybody. So, really don't have any fun.
right.
Okay? And that's basically what he's saying, is don't go to college and have fun. You got to be
Yeah.
serious. So I have learned so much about repressed memories. And from my experience, I wasn't ready to have these memories come back to me and be able to deal with it. I think you have to have support when you are going through a trauma and working through it. and for your body to feel safe. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score by
I
Vanderkolk.
have it on my desk. I haven't
Okay.
read it yet, but I have it on my desk.
Yeah, and it really talks about trauma and how the body holds that. And when you're ready, it will release it. If you ever become ready in this lifetime,
Right.
you may not. And after 20 years, I had been searching for a God that I knew that I had some concept of just a loving God, but every church I was going to was Protestant and they were putting a dualistic God in front of me. You are loved and you're protected, but here are these rules. And if you break them, shame on you, you're going to get judged.
Gonna burn in hell if you're Catholic, right?
Well,
Yeah.
and Lutheran and Southern Baptist, the wrath of God is going to
Yeah.
come on you.
Right.
So fear is basically what they're selling. And that wasn't my experience at all on the other side. God was pure love. There's
Yeah.
nothing about God that is fear. And any organization or person that's trying to get you to believe what they're about and they're using fear to do it, I'm telling you, run in the opposite direction.
Right.
It's not of God and what my experience was of God. So the repressed memory part of it, um, I was on my way to work at the Centers for Disease Control and I stopped to get a coffee. And all of a sudden, I had a flashback of how I was sitting in the car because I could never understand how I could cut my foot off and have all these injuries. It just didn't make sense to me. And I saw myself there and I got freaked out because the memory just kept coming. I went to my chiropractor and didn't go to work. I sat at his office all day long waiting for him to fit me in. And he's like, okay, Nicole, your body feels safe now, and we're going to let these memories come back up. And over the next 2 days, I remembered the entire sequence of events in detail of what
Wow.
happened. So I couldn't make that up, Francine. And that's the
Right.
other thing that people will say about memories if they come back, maybe a year later or 10 years later, whether it's sexual abuse or whatever that you're remembering, they're like, well, why didn't you remember earlier? They will discount it. And I'm like, my body wasn't ready. This is massive stuff to have to integrate into my nervous system and into my psyche and understand that everything that I was raised to believe basically is not true. Those belief systems were false. And now I've got to reorganize and reconceptualize who God is, what my family is, what my purpose is. My everything about me transformed, everything, including my body. So
Yeah.
so
I
it's
would I would
go ahead.
imagine there's some kind of it's either a breakdown or a breakthrough, right? Because that is just really shattering everything you know about yourself and
Right.
what your existence. It's like you're like, okay, everything I've thought for the last whatever, it's got to be almost, you were probably almost 40, right? Well,
Yep.
40 years is not true. And you almost like having a crisis of faith, I would think.
Yeah, and also I didn't get married till I was 40, and I was always having problem in relationships. I would date a guy and I would be so scared of his anger that I would do anything he said. And what I
Mm,
realized when my memory came back is the guy that was driving made a sexual pass at me right before we crashed, and I said no, and he didn't like my response and got angry with me and pivoted
ooh,
the steering wheel and we fishtailed out, hit a huge boulder, flipped the car, and that was it. So what my psyche had clamped down on was don't get a man angry, and
right.
or else you could be dead, basically was the message. So it only took me one guy after that memory came back, and then I met the guy that I'm
Then
now
you found
married.
that. Oh, love that.
So, there's reasons why things happen. And also, I believe in angels and spirit guides, Francine. And my spirit
Right.
guide was
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna kick your butt, Nicole, and get this memory to you because you've got work to do. It's not
Right.
about continuing to help people in with nutrition and physical activity and all these things you've been on the wellness road with. It's going to be about transforming people from the spiritual part of wellness, which nobody in the wellness industry is addressing right now. They only are addressing the emotional, the mental, and that's only recently. And they're still stuck in the physical. Here's what you need to eat. Here's what you need to go do your exercise and get your rest and all that kind of stuff. But the physical actually is the most important in the healing journey.
So let's talk about that because tell, like, what is spiritual wellness? Like, what does that even mean?
Well, it means a lot of different things to depending on what your definition of spirituality is
Sure.
versus religion and all that. But I will tell you, it is coming into alignment with your sense of purpose. And your body, mind, soul, and spirit all get into alignment, and you are on track for your soul journey, what you came into uh, this this life with. It's not necessarily a contract because it's I used to use that word, but I don't anymore because it has some fear associated with it. If you don't fulfill the contract, then, something bad's going to happen to you.
Right, right.
That's not what spirit is about at all, is instilling that fear, but you do have a lesson that you came here to learn. So it's getting you on that path and moving you forward to that. So it's your purpose, but also dealing with things like your death, your mortality, and actually asking the hard questions. What do you fear about death? Because your relationship with whatever you want to call God, source, higher power, whatever, directly determines your relationship with death. So if you have a fear with God, you're going to have fear with death, that you weren't good enough or that you weren't worthy enough or you're not, all these low vibe messages. So spirituality is looking at that whole buffet that has to do with really what you believe and going into that consciousness and awareness and confronting it and getting yourself on the right path to your soul's evolution.
Ooh. And what is to talk a little bit about neuro emotional technique. So tell us what that is, because I'm an EFT practitioner, but it sounds different.
Yeah,
So,
it is a little bit different. Neuro emotional technique is a mind body stress tool that I learned about probably 8 years ago in my own healing journey, and it was a game changer to me. I started getting my healing elevated, and a lot of things that I couldn't process or couldn't get through. Doing NET was a game changer in my life. It really was. So I went and got certified, and I changed my whole practice from nutrition and wellness as a general means to getting at the root issue, because you can have all the knowledge in the world about, okay, like a diabetic, I'd put them on a diet or whatever, and then they hit a stressor in their life, and boom, they go to the food for comfort, and they'll eat the whole pint of Ben and Jerry's. They use the container as their bowl.
right.
And then you just get into numbing yourself out, the
Right.
dopamine hit. And I say that you put yourself in a trance, whether it's with wine or food or shopping or whatever, binging on Netflix. But it's all designed to keep you from actually doing the work and looking at yourself and having to become aware and make the necessary changes in your life and get to these root issues and dig through them and unravel these belief systems that you have. But NET uses the principles of kinesiology, manual muscle testing, acupuncture, you have acupressure points, and psychology. And what it does is it's non-invasive, and it helps your body remember. So what the practitioner will do will map your body for emotions. And the Chinese figured this out over 5,000 years ago, that every organ has a emotion to it. So liver is about anger. And
Yeah.
I just had a client yesterday. She had breast cancer and metastasized to her liver. And I said, well, your liver is about anger. And I said, how do you do with expressing anger? And she said, I don't. I step it down. And I said, well, I'm not surprised then that it's gone there, because you
Right.
now have it's a wake up call. Your body is sending the red flag, wake up and express this anger. And she was angry at God. She was Catholic, and she was angry at God because she's only 31 and she has 3 kids, and she got breast cancer, and now she thought she was doing everything right.
Right.
God was a vending machine. She was doing everything right, and she was supposed to she pushed the button for Coca-Cola, and did gummit, nothing came out. And of course,
Yeah.
the church will say you did something wrong. So she's now starting to have a journey of her faith, is basically what it is, and connecting to redefining her concept of God to something that she can have a relationship with instead of fearing it. So it's really important to have to unpack all this. And we are an emotionally illiterate country. I'm just going to say it, Francine. We basically grow up with 4 emotions: bad, mad, sad, and glad.
Do
Okay.
we even have that many? Right. I mean, I talk a lot about this in my work as well, because I'm somebody who lived in my head, right? When people used to say, "How does that feel?" I'd be like, I don't
Okay.
understand the question. What do you mean, right?
Or
But
fine.
but
If somebody tells me I'm fine again, that's
right.
stuff
Well,
insecure.
but when you think about it from such an early age, right? A child falls down and starts crying, and the parent automatically says, "You're fine. You're
Yes.
okay." We don't ask, "Are you okay? What's wrong? How do you feel?" We tell them they're okay,
Right.
right? So from such an early age, we're told just to stuff it down.
And women, especially in our country, not saying it doesn't happen to men, but especially with the hard emotions like anger and
Sure.
shame. Like I developed an eating disorder as the result of not getting mental health help because my parents told the doctor when he said Nicole needs psychological help with this trauma. They said, Jesus is our psychiatrist. She will be just fine. And I will
Mm,
tell you, I was anything but fine because the body will have to find a way to cope with the
right.
pain and the suffering. And I had hated myself so much back then and didn't understand why I would compulsively eat. And this is back in the early 80s when it wasn't even known as binge eating disorder. I lived with that for 20 years. And you want to talk about shame and secretive. And here I am, a dietitian. Well, I went into dietetics to try to fix myself.
Right.
If I could understand food and why I'm eating, then I could fix myself and then I could go help others. So a lot of us get into this work because we're trying to fix ourselves at some point in
Oh,
our
of course. Yeah. I
yeah.
used to weigh 300 pounds. I don't know that I've ever been hungry a day in my life, right? Like, because it was, and now I mean, I can, if I'm doing something hard or something uncomfortable, I get up to go get something and I'm like, hold on, are you hungry? Like it's still there, but now I have just learned to actually check in with myself and not just, not just go for the whatever.
Yeah, and I tell people with food, especially, you just have to decode it. If you're not hungry and you're eating chips and popcorn, crunch, 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 what emotion do you think that is?
Right.
Anger. You're repressing anger. So take a
Yeah.
minute and go, wait a minute, who am I angry with? And a lot of times you're probably angry at yourself
Yeah.
because you had a boundary and you slid the boundary down so somebody could jump over and attack you
Well,
again.
and I would even say,
Um,
you said emotions are hard for women in this country. I would say I used to teach at a healing school, and there would be 90% women and 10% men because it's not really cool for guys to cry or be sensitive, right? Like and it was fascinating to watch because it was so beautiful to watch guys actually tap into their emotions because that isn't acceptable in air quoting the real world, right? So
yeah,
I think it's both, right? I think we both if
it absolutely is.
yeah. I
Yeah.
love the
And the
Abraham
same thing.
Hicks emotional scale. Have you ever seen the
Yes,
emotional
yes,
scale?
I have.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, and you can't go from like anger to joy. You can go from anger to frustrated, anger to, like you can move up it, but knowing that there's, 20 some odd emotions, and like you said, we live with four.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, and the other one I want to just say, if you're binging on sweets, what I would say to you is, how are you not being sweet to yourself? How are you beating yourself up or shaming yourself? And who is not being sweet to you? So if you have
Mm,
kids, are they not being sweet to you? Or your partner, is he judging you or criticizing you or whatever? And then you go to that food and trying to get that sweetness from the food instead of giving it to yourself or putting up a boundary with your family and friends and saying, you're not going to talk about my weight anymore. That's off limits. You don't get to do that. But
yeah.
that's hard to do. And it takes practice, and they're so used to you giving in that you're changing who you are and they don't like it a lot of times because they've been used to getting what they want. So just some tidbits there from nutrition.
I
But I
love
want to go
that.
back to, I know you're about fun. And I want to say, what are the first three letters in the word funeral?
Right, right. FUN. Yeah.
Yes.
I love that. I remember being at a funeral once and I think I was with my sister And it was, somebody young who passed. So it wasn't like, they were 90 and you're like, oh, it's their time. It was I think it was a friend's son. I think it was my friend's son's funeral. And my sister and I laughed, and a friend of mine was sitting like she got up. She was so pissed off that we were laughing, right? But it's like life does go on. And we weren't laughing at the fact that the person was dead. Something was shared between us and it made us giggle. And it wasn't like we were doubled over at a funeral and being disrespectful. But my friend was like horrified that we're not friends anymore, but like horrified, right? Because we were laughing, like, how can you laugh at this horrible event? And yes, it was a horrible event. And yes, life still does go on.
And the thing is their spirit is still there. So
Right.
you're just missing the physical container of the person, but you still can talk to that person. There's a whole new subcategory, after death communication now, of talking to loved ones. When I was on the other side, I talk in my book, You Are Deathless, about Casper the Friendly Ghost was the angel that came down and picked me up. And then right after I published the book, Francine, I'm sitting here writing about something and I smell cigar smoke, and nobody in my household smokes cigars or anything. And I'm like, why would I smell cigar smoke? And then I hear this voice, Nicole, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm losing it. And it was my grandfather who passed when he was 58 years old from a massive heart attack. And he said, I have finally come to tell you I am your angel. I am Casper, the friendly ghost. I saw the abuse that you were undergoing at the academy. I saw how you lived in fear and were terrorized all the time about everything. And he said, this was the only way to get you out saving face. And he said, so I'm going to be with you until you transition again for the last time. I'm going to be your protective angel. So
Mm.
he's with me, and I saw him. He was in his 30s. So you will see your deceased loved ones when you transition. You will see your pets. Okay. So yes, they're going to be there barking, your feathered friends, your furry friends, they're all going to be there. So that is something to look forward to.
I remember when my mom was transitioning, she was heavily medicated. She died very young. She was 48. And we were in her hospital room, and she's pointing to the corner that her mother was there, and her mother had already passed. And we were all like, and this was 1991, right? So it was a long time ago. And, it was before I was into my journey. And I still believed, I knew there were psychics and mediums and people talked to the dead, but I don't think I realized at the time that the veil was so thin and she was getting ready, which was just fascinating. Now I'm like, oh, and even what's even more fascinating. So I do multiple healing modalities, but when I was getting my Reiki certification 12, 13 years ago, I was like, oh my God, my mom used to get energy work. She used to go to a guy in New Hampshire and he made her feel good, right? But in the 90s, nobody was talking about this shit,
Right.
right?
That's right.
I was like, my mother was getting Reiki or some other form of energy work, but nobody talked about it. But that's what was happening.
And that's one of my issues with religion is it doesn't talk about this kind of stuff, and it doesn't bring the essence of that we're all energy. I had to totally
Right.
get out of church in order to find my alignment and understand really what happened to me, and that it was all a transformative process. And yeah, so it's been quite the journey. Not to say you can't have religious affiliations and ties, I think,
Sure.
but I think you have to be able to separate what the bigger picture is here of God and consciousness and energy, and that we are all at a soul level. That is the energy, that is your breath in and out. That, when you lose your breath, then you die. So that energy, at death, leaves you. And you will, people that have been at people's bedsides when they transitions, they see their last breath, and the other thing about dying is, remember, the first sound, the first of the senses that you get in the womb is hearing. And the last one to go when you die is hearing. So
Interesting.
what you say is so important to loved ones,
Hmm.
to friends. And the other piece I want to say about death is we need to be mindful of it in the present moment. Okay. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. I never thought that I would die at 19 years old. And don't take it for granted you're going to be alive tomorrow. So leave conversations. I mean, you still have to have boundaries with toxic people and all that, but when you're talking to people, be mindful if this is the last conversation I'm having with you, how do you want it to go? Be kind, be loving, be listening, be, you know, empathetic, be sympathetic, all of these um, characteristics of a conversation that have love embraced in it. Because
Right.
on the other side, I will tell you the main theme is love and oneness.
Mm, that's beautiful. What a beautiful place to end. I do love to ask this question though. What is something you live by that you want to share with our listeners? I mean, I have a sense that you've kind of already touched on it, but is there something that you live by that you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, and I wrote it. It's called "You Are Deathless,"
Perfect. I love it. All
and then
right.
that is your top.
And they can get that where? On Amazon?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, it's Kindle. I even did the Audible. I narrated it myself. Then I had to go back into therapy because that was another healing realm to actually
Mm.
voice what you write, and then to listen to yourself tell your own journey. That's another layer of healing. So you're incorporating different senses in the healing journey.
Fascinating.
It is.
So I did pull three cards.
What you
I
did.
pulled cards at the start of every show for our listeners and for you to choose. One of them fell out earlier, and Nicole and I, it was a message to Nicole and I to enter the magic. So as we had this conversation, so I pulled from the Magic of Unicorn deck. I love unicorn. Unicorn is my spirit guide. Oh, love that. She has a unicorn mug. All right. So Nicole, I'm going to invite you to choose. I have a left, I have center, and I have right.
This one. So
This
my
one?
right.
So my
That's
left.
yeah.
Okay. Access your gifts. Explore your treasure chest. Accept who you truly are, which sounds like you have done that.
What a journey. I think that's very validating for me.
Yep.
Thank you.
And the one on the in the center, what is the pool of Christ light? Open your heart, spread unconditional love.
Well, we're all eternal sparks of God. That's exactly what
Right?
the light. Yes.
You can't make this shit up. The if you chose the card on the right, soul healing.
Oh, that's wow.
Align with your essence, see your true colors. I love how these cards always, and I don't look at them, so they always somehow are intertwined with the conversation. So Nicole, thank you so much for this conversation. And for those of you listening, thank you for joining me on today's journey towards a more enlightened and fulfilling life. I hope today's episode has inspired you to embrace your inner wisdom and navigate your path with a renewed sense of purpose. Remember that your transformation begins within. Take a moment each day to connect with your higher self and trust that the universe is guiding you towards your highest good. If you found today's episode valuable, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with others who might benefit from our message. Your support really helps us to reach more souls on their spiritual journey. You can stay connected with both Nicole and I. All of our contact information will be in the show notes. And until next time, continue to shine your light and walk in peace. I am Francine Tirrell, and this has been FN Fridays with Francine. Nicole, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Namaste.